Welcome to So Very Easy. My name is Laura, and today I would like to make a two-color quilt. The two-color quilt can be turned into a two-fabric quilt, but I want a combination of some blues and some beiges. And I'm going to be able to make this quilt with one 2.5-inch roll and two charm packs. This blue and beige fabric line is from Bernina, and it is called Elegant Keepsake. And what I like about it is all of the beiges read the same and all of the blues read the same, but they're not the same fabric. If we look at the back of that charm pack, it does show us the different blues and beiges. You can see that they are different, but they really read the same. So you can see where those beiges are a little bit different, but the colors are the same, and same with the blue. The quilt is going to consist of rectangles and squares cut from 2.5 inches and half square triangles made from these 5-inch squares. Now I only need the half square triangles to equal 2.5 inches. So it does look like we're going to have a lot of waste, but I do have another project that we're going to be able to use that extra for. The half square triangles are going to be made the same way as we normally make them. Draw a line from corner to corner, stitch 1/4 inch on each side, and then trim them apart. So we have two of these pieces. Before I press this open, I'm going to trim my 2.5-inch square out of it and do some stitching and trimming for a second quilt. I do have a 2.5-inch square, so I'm going to be able to use that. And I have a diagonal line. That diagonal line is going to sit on the seam allowance. So let me draw that seam allowance so you can see it. So I have that seam, and I'm going to put that line going from corner to corner on that seam. Then I can trim off that extra. If you don't have a 2.5-inch ruler, you can use any ruler. What you're looking for is the 2.5-inch mark on one side and on the other. And those 2.5-inch marks are going to go on the seam allowance. So I'm going to be able to trim this off in this way. So I'm going to trim that one side off, clean up that pinked edge. This is now 2.5 inches, and I will need a total of 80 of these. But I do have this left over. So this is the seam that is the continuation. And what I want to do is stitch 1/4 inch on this short side. So it won't matter what direction it is, just stitch along that short side. I'm going to take this seam, turn it into a half square triangle. The maximum size you're going to get is about 2 inches. So you need to just decide how big you are going to make it. Now I'm going to trim off that first half square triangle at my 2 inches. So I now have a 2-inch half square triangle. And I'm going to have the beginning of a 4 patch. And those leftovers can be trimmed down to a 4 patch, and you can make a start block. So now we're not wasting any fabric at all. But let's get on to the quilt that I have in mind. Our half square triangles are done. Now we can work on a 4 patch. We're going to be able to make strip sets, which means we're going to sew a dark and a light together. Match that up and sew a scant 1/4 inch right along that line. And be sure to have your foot run along the outside of that measurement. It's going to give us a little bit more here so we can trim it down. So we're going to have these long strips sewn together. And I would recommend making 5 of these strip sets to start off with. Once we have them sewn together, we're going to trim them. And I like to trim them before I press them. And I'm going to trim them to segments at 2.5 inches. And cut that entire strip into these 2.5-inch pieces. So we have 2.5 inch here. This is not correct, but that's okay. We're going to be able to adjust that. I'm going to take these to the machine and just finger press them. So the seams are going up to the blue. Flip that over and be sure to match this seam. And it's going to nestle together. So we're going to be able to stitch a 1/4 inch. This now needs to be trimmed down to 4.5 inches. We can use a 4.5 inch ruler or measure over 2 1/8 of an inch on each side. Just keep trimming as you go around until you get that beautiful 4.5 inch. We are going to need 40 of these. So we're going to need some additional sizes. We're going to need 2.5 inch squares of both blue and this beige. And we're also going to need 2.5 by 8.5. So at this point, we are going to need to trim these down to a proper 2.5 inch strip. And you're going to find that we don't have that much to trim off. But at this point, I do like to be a little bit more accurate. From that light color, I am going to need 49 2.5 by 8.5, and these are going to turn into sashing blocks. We're also going to need some of those cut as squares, and we're going to need 40 of these. That's what we're going to need for that light beige. For the darker blue, some of these will go on the end of the sashing rows, but they also are part of the quilt block. So we're going to need 40 for the quilt and 30 for the sashing blocks. So we need to build another block. Take those half square triangles and divide them in half so that that darker color is going to face inside. So we're going to sew those units together, these together, and then sew that together. And we will have 40 of these, which will match 40 of these. We are now going to be able to sew these two piles together. We do want that light block to go up towards the darker block. So the half square triangle light side is going to that light block. We're going to be able to sew all of those units together. We will now have 80 units that look like this, and we're going to divide that pile in half and stitch them together. So we're going to have those blue blocks running down the center and sort of those tulip blocks facing in. And when it's pressed and finished, this is an 8.5 inch block. You can really see the 4 patch here. However, we did do this is the 4 patch. We are now going to be able to sew our blocks together. We have 20, so we're going to divide that pile in half. And we do need to pay attention to the layout. We do want to have all of the pieces going in the same direction. I have the half square triangles facing and the solid blue facing. And we need to sew that 2.5 inch by 8.5 inch between the two of them. We could take this, divide it in half, and we're going to put the piece in the center, but we're also going to put a piece on each side. And just keep in mind, we do want all the patterns going in the same direction. We now have 5 rows put together with that built-in sashing. We're now going to be able to put these rows together with a sashing row. If you have all of your stacks going in the same direction, you're going to take every other row and twist it. The half square triangle blocks are going to go together, and the 4 patch are going to go together. But we are going to add a row of sashing in between. I did press so that the block was coming into this row. So for this block, I pressed the blue going out into that beige. So I have 4 of the 8.5 by 2.5 sandwiched in between those 2.5 inch squares. And this time I did have the 2.5 inch squares on each end. So we need to put these rows together with this in between, and we also need to have one on the top and the bottom. The quilt top is now 42.5 inches by 52.5 inches. I have left over 10 strips in blue and 3 strips in this light beige. And yours might be slightly different depending on what fabric you used and how you did the cutting. For my next border, I'm going to cut 2 pieces of blue at 42.5, and that's going to go for the 2 short sides. I'm also going to do 2.5-inch cornerstones in this beige. And I do have some little pieces that I'm going to be able to use. The 2 sides, I need a piece at 52.5 inches. So I'm going to have to join some pieces to get the size that I want. The quilt top is now done. It is 46.5 inches by 56.5 inches. And good news, I do have enough of the blue to do the binding. I just took what was left over and put it all together, which means I will have enough. I do have 3 strips left of the beige. Other than that, just those little pieces that were done from the half square triangles. I haven't put them together yet. I do want to see what I can come up with. And I still am going to be able to use this as I go along. So 1 jelly roll, 2 charm packs, we get this quilt. I do hope you give it a try, and as always, thank you for joining me today on Sew Very Easy. Feel free to subscribe. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, and I do have a newsletter. It's all free under Sew Very Easy. And be sure to make every day a Sewtacular day. Bye for now.